Thanks for being here. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Donald Trump Jr.
I'm going to stand.
Well, just for a moment. Donald Trump Jr., welcome back to Oklahoma, the state where your dad carried all of Oklahoma's 77 counties. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
I think we're a little hot, maybe. Somebody said, yeah, that's right. Well, Don, thank you very much for coming back.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for your friendship, relationship to Oklahoma. I know this. Well, before I get there, I ought to do something that you suggested I do, and I started right down this path because you're a busy man. It's a tight schedule. My family's here today, and I better not say one more word without introducing my family. Our daughter, Lauren, is here. You may have seen her in the TV commercials. Lauren is here. Our son, Griffin, is here. I want to recognize them. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, Steve and Laura Brown, they're here. My sister, Fawn, is here. But I want to ask one person to stand, somebody who I think will make a great First Lady of Oklahoma, my wife, Monica Lamb. For those of you wondering, yes, she is a school teacher, and yes, our kids attend school, but we took a personal day. Don, thanks for being here, as I said already. I know this, but I suspect many in the room do not know. This is not your first time to Oklahoma, even setting aside the 2016 presidential campaign when you were here with your dad and outside of your dad. But tell us about your other trips to Oklahoma, if you would.
Well, obviously, I'm a big outdoorsman. I don't know that anyone's not heard that at this point.
Right.
Especially where I'm from, it's sort of demonized, so I spend a lot of time down in this neck of the woods. And so I actually had a ranch just north of Durant for years with another buddy of mine, and so I was down here all the time. And that was before I got invited to the Lieutenant Governor's turkey hunt. I came that in 2015 and 16, actually. And I'm not going to talk about who was the Yankee that won the Sporting Clays Championship at both of those events, both times, because
Don,
I know you pride yourselves on this.
Who was the Yankee that won that?
It may have been me twice. Twice. Undefeated, but two beautiful Weatherby shotguns, nicely engraved from the Governor's Hunt for winning that. So it's always nice to come down south, and the Texans and the Oklahomans and city boy from New York manages to beat them.
Well, I've seen your boots. I've seen you hunt. I know you did well in the competition. You might be from New York, but you're no city boy.
No, I'm not.
I'm
lost.
You're lost. Well, and we try to get you back the last couple of years. Your schedule is obviously very, very busy, very hectic. We invite you back to Oklahoma for that hunt or any activity, any time. But I want to brag, if I can, as a dad for a moment. Our kids are hunters. I'm a hunter, as you know, but our daughter Lauren, 14, she harvested her first turkey this year just a couple weeks ago.
That's what I hear. That's awesome.
So we're pretty excited about that. Each year in Oklahoma, I visit all 77 counties. That's kind of my way of being a voice of the people and knowing how best to drain the swamp in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. You are traveling everywhere all the time. Today you're doing it. You do it consistently. You're all across the country.
Yeah.
So whether, I'm trying to ask you what you may have learned in 2016, 2017, 2018 that you've seen around the country, and what's maybe your advice here in Oklahoma on what the state could do to work with businesses moving forward?
Well, so I think for me it was an invaluable lesson, right? Because I think so much of the noise and the media that's generated comes from the sort of the zones in New York and LA, and they sort of forget about that dark mass everywhere in between. Again, New York and Malibu. There's a lot of the country, and for me, I got to go around, and I think I visited close to probably all 4,000 counties in the country. I basically decided early on that the only place it made no sense for me to be was wherever my father was. right? He sort of created a vacuum. So I was like, I'm just going to go everywhere else. So I'll
divide
hit the
and
small
conquer.
areas. I'll hit the places that, you know, just can't really handle the capacity of what he's going to bring into those rooms. And what I learned early on and what I noticed early on was like, you know, we're doing much better than anyone's saying. You know, I saw that because it wasn't just, you know, watching it from the media. It was hearing real people, and not just, you know, what they, you know, the old angry white man that they were saying, that's the only guy ever voting for Trump. That's the only way it's going to happen. I mean, I had every possible group, and you know, Charlie Kirk is here in the room, and he'd travel with me, and you know, we'd see people coming up to us, and it was like, uh-oh, like I'm going to get slapped by that person, and they're actually coming up and saying, keep it up. You know, from whatever stereotypically you would say would not have been a Trump supporter, like, we just need some real change. And so it was awesome to see that. And now that, I think, was missing from so many of our politicians, frankly, on both sides. Mm-hmm. They don't go around. They don't see it. I've had it where I'm speaking for people, you know, in the Midwest or, you know, places very far from New York City, where I'm from, and they're saying, wow, you really connect well with these people, Don. I'm like, yeah, the fact that you don't is kind of a problem, isn't it? Like, you live here. You want to represent these people. Like, they should have that understanding. And so, you know, not just from a business perspective, but from a leadership, from when you then go to Washington, from whatever it may be, you know, having those sort of boots on the ground and really having a relationship with those people was amazing. So I got to see stuff that no one else was seeing because we were actually there. It's not rocket science, but it's sort of become an anomaly. So it was a game changer.
Well, that echoes what I've learned traveling to all 77 counties. That's not 4,000 as you have done, but going to 77 counties, I learned. You see where the people live, where the citizens work, where they worship, and you learn. Always learned a lot more being on the ground in communities than just receiving an email or a phone call or trying to host an event at the state capitol or in Oklahoma City. We have many friends here from the Panhandle, for example. I'll be in the Panhandle this coming weekend. It'll be my 6th trip to the Panhandle in the last 12 months. Amazing. And we go out to Felt or Boise City or Beaver. Folks say, thanks for coming out. Not everybody else does that. Thank you for coming out. So I appreciate you echoing some of the things I've learned. One thing I think everyone here wants to know, what's your dad really like? No, and obviously, obviously excluding what we see on the news, and I don't know what the percentage is, but so many people will ever meet your dad or any president of the United States. So tell us about your dad.
Listen, honestly, there's an element of, you know, what you see is what you get with him, and I think that's what makes him somewhat relatable. I mean, he'll say the things that he's thinking, as we've all seen more than once, but he'll actually voice them in a way that people are like, you know what, he's right. Now, a lot of people don't have his soapbox, they don't have his platform, and, you know, candidly, they don't always have his guts to take that position because they realize it could be controversial, even if they agree with it. You know, but he is very much the way you see him, and I think, you know, for years, I dubbed him the blue-collar billionaire, you know, 2 decades ago, because it's sort of the way he is in many ways. You know, he's not, while he's sort of, you know, the ultra-luxury aspect of his business that he's created, but his ideal day is sort of, we'll sit home, eat a pizza or a cheeseburger, and watch a ball game. So he gets that, and he spent so much time in the construction side. Again, it wasn't just sort of trapped, you know, in an office overlooking Central Park. It was on the job, sort of like in the counties, right? He would go and he would speak to these, you know, union laborers, workers, all these guys, and actually get their real opinion, not just what some executive is feeding them from, you know, based on a spreadsheet. He got it, and because of that, he got good advice. It made him a better builder. It made him a better developer. And I think it gave him a real connection to real people. And I think that's what was able to really help him transcend so many of these traditional, you know, voting blocks that would have never even thought about voting for a Republican in their lives. And I saw that on the campaign trail. It's like, you know, I'm 18 to 83. I think 83 was the oldest I met that said, you know, I'd never registered to vote, never even thought about it, or I was a lifelong Democrat and I just switched so I could vote for your father in a primary or in the general. And it was really amazing to see that because he was able to break through so many of those barriers, and it was because despite perhaps the persona or the image that he had created for himself, the behind the scenes was very different. He's a very normal guy that way, and you know, the greatest irony of the whole thing was that you had this billionaire from New York City was the guy that was able to talk to blue-collar America, and I think that was really a major breakthrough.
I want to talk about your dad a little bit more and dial down to maybe your rearing and growing up. My dad, we have some common ground in this respect, raised by larger-than-life fathers. And I shared with you earlier that I lost my dad this January. Miss him every day, but Dad gave me an example of service to God and service to fellow man. But Dad's greatest life lesson to me, he often said, "Hey Todd, dance with the one who brung ya." And then he would follow it up, because he was a stickler for grammar. He'd say, "That's bad grammar, but the point is, don't forget who your friends are." Yep. And my dad was a loyalist. Yep. He cherished loyalty. He instilled that on me, to be loyal to your friends and always stand with them. So that was the greatest life lesson Dad gave me. How about you? What was some of the greatest advice your dad gave you growing up?
You know, the loyalty aspect is certainly, you know, something that's big with him. I mean, that was always a thing. You see that. I mean, the media criticizes him for sticking by his people and fighting for them. So, I mean, that's something that was definitely there. But I think he always, you know, also always sort of said, "Hey, you got to go out there and do it yourself." You know, I think his thing was like, in life, you don't really get anything you don't ask for and then aggressively pursue. And I sort of learned that the hard way. I mean, he always had us working from a very young age. You know, so the story goes, I was working as a dock attendant for 2 years in Atlantic City, away from home. I was probably 14 years old at the time, so it was nice. You're working at a dock, it's beautiful, making minimum wage, but also tips, right? You're out. So a little bit different. And then he was like, well, time to step up a little bit. So I started working landscaping. I always joke, I'm the only son of a billionaire who can drive a D10 Caterpillar, because I was actually working heavy equipment, running chainsaws, doing this sort of stuff. And so I'm sort of halfway through this summer. And now I'm making minimum wage, but there's no tips in landscaping, right? There's no tips for driving.
You've got to be really good.
Bulldozers. You got to be really good. And so I'm sitting there, and I go to him at the end of summer. I go, I'm working so much harder, and I'm making less. Why didn't you give me a raise? And he looked at me like I'm an idiot, and he goes, why would I pay you more than you were willing to work for? And so I was like, aha, aha. So, I tried negotiating retroactive. That failed miserably, but, I got the boost for the following summer. But it was an important lesson, because it was like, wait a second, like, things aren't just going to always fall in your lap. And I've been very blessed, coming from a fortunate family. I recognize that. But he made sure we understood what it still meant to go hunt for yourself.
Great life lesson. What did you think, or maybe your thoughts now, but what did you think initially when your dad chose and really made the unprecedented step to bypass the mainstream media and communicate via Twitter?
You know what? I thought it was great. And then, there were some mornings I woke up and I was like, ooh, what's gonna, hey, I don't want to wake up just because I don't want to see what they're saying now. But the reality of the situation was I was there for so much of it. I was in the room when these things happened. And you see then what is reported. I'm like, wait a minute, I was with him, all day yesterday, and they're saying that he was at this rally in Michigan. I'm like, wait, I was at that rally in Michigan, and what they're saying he said is not at all what he said. And it's sort of like, you can't take 5 sentences from minute number 1, 2 sentences from minute number 76, blend it with a couple of words from minute 45 in one speech and just say, well, yes, he said all those words, but like not at all in that context. So I saw how badly things were manipulated to suit, a media agenda and narrative. And, it was really like I wasn't even present. So, he really just came up with it. He's like, I'm just playing monkey in the middle with them. They're in the middle. I'm just going to go right to the people. And that's what he's done time and time again, and it works. And, despite all the criticism, guess what? He's driving the narrative every day. Every time he hits that little button, he's driving the narrative of what everyone's talking about. And you can't really mince words in 140 characters, 280 now, or less. And I think it was probably one of the most powerful tools he could have had.
I would agree. There's no question that your dad has been able to accomplish as president has been absolutely incredible, particularly in short order, particularly with as many obstacles and opponents that have been in the way. The economy booming, back on track, regulations are more and more rolled back every single day. We've had real significant tax reform. That was accomplished, I think, maybe a week to 2 weeks after one congressman said it was DOA.
Yeah.
Then it got accomplished about 2 weeks later. Your dad's bringing jobs back to Oklahoma, fulfilling the campaign pledge and rhetoric of making America great again. What is it you think Oklahoma can do to participate and help the administration?
Well, I don't know that they could vote much better. If we got all those counties. No, listen, they got to keep going. There's so many great business guys here. There's so many friends of ours that we have here. That we have so much support from this part of the world, obviously with the energy sector. I mean, people have to be out there talking about these things. I think oftentimes because of, again, the narrative, so many people are reluctant to speak about the success stories that they have because they know it goes against, what perhaps the media or people who are going to be writing about these things, that sort of elite class, are talking about. But you see that, and I think that message has to get disseminated. And I see it every day from real people who are like, hey, that $2,000 a year that I'm making more now, that ain't crumbs. That's a huge difference. And again, the fact that leadership on the other side doesn't even comprehend that could move a needle for real working class, hardworking Americans is mind-boggling. But that's where we're at. And so I would say for everyone, both here and everywhere else, talk about these things. Talk about every time I run into a small business owner, hey, I hired 20 new full-time employees this year because I can afford to do it. Those people now are able to send their kids to good schools. They're able to do this. What it's able to do for even their family structure, just having that confidence, knowing that their job is likely to be there tomorrow still. That's a big deal. And all those things would have been, shut for, some sort of arbitrary, sort of over-regulated, you need the government agenda. And, that's what the other side has become. Other than being just pure obstructionists, they're the party of dependence. They need you to be dependent on them. If you're not, what do they have? What are they going to run on? They're going to run on jobs? Are they going to run on the stock market? Are they going to run on, frankly, now even international successes? I love watching so many of the pundits on TV. Well, I was at a think tank discussing North Korea for 25 years, and Trump's doing it all wrong. Wait, 25 years? You couldn't even get a meeting. This is your life's work. My 3-year-old, if she spent 25 years, could get a meeting. And they're talking about how it's all wrong, and yet it seems to be coming together pretty amazingly. It's just the thinking has become so myopic that I think people have to really break out of that box and not just go with those typical norms that they've been listening to, because it's working and it's been really successful.
It has been very successful. Very successful. You mentioned international, specifically Korea. What has happened there just in recent days? Extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary.
Well, and by the way, that's perhaps the point, which is it's already historic.
It is already historic.
If nothing happens from this point on,
right.
It's the greatest foreign policy accomplishment in that region of the world since perhaps before the conflict even started. Mm-hmm. But the second those things started to happen, all of a sudden it was crickets. I'm like, weird. Like, I'm not seeing even talk about this stuff on the usual channels and the networks, and it's sort of amazing. So I guess whatever they can do to try to stymie that success. But what's nice is I think that side has overplayed their hand so big and so many times that I think real people are actually starting to get it. So you take the most powerful guy in the world, whatever you want to call it, and you've all of a sudden now made him an underdog. That regular people, whichever side they were on, and frankly, you'll never have here, you'll probably always have this, but real people in the middle, which is probably the majority of America in many respects, they're getting it and they're seeing it. And I think that only bodes very well for us for the next 6 years.
Well, you mentioned strength. Your dad is strong. He's the leader of the free world. And it reminds me the conviction of peace through strength. Yeah. And for the leader of North Korea to tell the leader of South Korea, hey, you can come inspect all the sites, bring anybody you want with you, just as long as the U.S. does not invade.
Yeah, that was essentially the message. Things, right? This is, they've already agreed to shut down the program. They're not going to do any more testing right now. I mean, that's the greatest accomplishment in that part of the world since the war started there. I mean, the war is probably ending, right? Those are big deals, and you don't hear about it. But that's the difference when you have someone in office that has resolve. So I mean, you can't draw a red line and have someone walk over and slap you in the face 15 times. Like eventually, they're just going to keep doing it. And that's what we have. You can say what you want, but weakness isn't going to get you anywhere with these people. I think the notion that you have resolve, that you will act, that you will follow through on your word, I mean, that's a big deal. And it's not just them. Everyone else in the world sees it too. And that matters.
Well, and also your dad's position of moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Guess what? 99 votes in the Senate to do it. Both sides. It's probably one of the most unpartisan things in the history of D.C. politics. And yet, For 20 years, 30 years, we've been hearing about it. We're, oh yeah, that's a great idea, great idea. No one had the guts to actually do it. Oh, there's going to be major... We heard about it. There's going to be major fallout. There's going to be riots all over the world. It's going to be turmoil. What happened? Nothing. There were 2 days of riots. They had 3 people and a dog chanting, and the media films it from a low angle, so it looks like it's a massive crowd. Nothing happened. But we've seen this time and time again. It's a big deal, and I think it should matter to Americans. It should matter to voters, both sides.
It does.
At least, when you say you're going to do something, you follow through. I've heard about promises from, these politicians on, the other side for decades. But action, deliverance of those promises, that's what matters.
Your dad is a man of action because he's been a man of plans, and I want to get to that in a moment. But let's stick with the international just for a moment. Since we're talking about that, I've said, as the next governor of Oklahoma, I'm going to appoint the first Secretary of International Trade that Oklahoma's ever had. Oklahoma has a basic mathematical problem in that we have just under 4 million folks. That's a challenge when you try to churn a very robust economy. We have a very diverse sector in manufacturing and fabrication. We manufacture and fabricate widgets in agriculture, oil and gas, aviation, aerospace, air conditioning parts. I mean, you name it, we're making that widget or fabricating that widget to some degree. But I've said in Oklahoma, we must focus more on our trade partners like Taiwan.
Of course.
They're dependent on allies. United Kingdom, they're about to divorce Europe, March of 2019. Your dad and you've talked quite a bit about international trade and in a proactive way, positive way, changing the trade imbalance we have in our country, and Oklahoma wants to be an instrumental part of that.
As they should, and the fact that you're doing that there's a lot of foresight to that, because it's a big world. There's a lot of places to get something, but when you're actually proactively out there hunting for that business doesn't just fall in your lap. So that you get that, you understand it. It doesn't just come to you. You have to have a real special business that they're just coming to you. I mean, you have to get out there and do those things to be able to do that, and then you combine that with sort of the notion of a more powerful country. That country was resolved, and guess what? All of a sudden, these international trade deals, they want to start doing business with America, as opposed to other people. That relationship translates, even though it's a purely business relationship, those relationships transcend and become policy amongst those countries. And I think that can go a long way to mitigating a lot of the shortfalls we have in our trade, because we've had politicians that haven't had that resolve, because they've given it into everything, because you have organizations that have been created and staffed to basically try to stymie the growth in the U.S., where it's become the U.S. versus the world, and we don't do well in those international courts. And every time there's a battle, the U.S. gets lost, and they're stealing our IT, and it doesn't end. It's pretty terrible. So. I think now, again, with that resolve, I think people are less likely to do that, less likely to take advantage, which brings more business back to this country, which means they're actually utilizing our stuff, not just stealing it. And that's a big deal.
Well, Taiwan, 20 plus million folks. United Kingdom, 65 million. You're getting pretty close to 90 million mouths to feed, backs to clothe, and consumers that want and buy things. It'd be a game changer for Oklahoma to participate with the administration and to be a strong central part of our country on international trade. Let's go back to plans. You mentioned that with how strong your dad is. I said I think it's because of planning. I'm going to go out on a limb, Don, and say you attend a reception or two. You are out in the public every day. You have a detail. You work with the Secret Service. I don't know if anybody has hugged more agents than I have today. Very manly hugs, by the way.
Yes. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
No, but my point is...
2018 disclaimer.
As you know, I'm a former special agent with the United States Secret Service. I'm not going to put any of the men and women on the spot here, but maybe a third of your detail or the local office here I know personally or have worked with previously. It's great to see them again. They do a fantastic job.
Yes, they do.
The lens, they do. Give them a hand.
Even now.
Every Secret Service agent that knows me will text me later, Todd, I cannot believe you did that. But I say that preface to say that is the lens in which I look through every single day as a former U.S. Secret Service agent. And I've said this kind of pragmatically, anecdotally, that when I was in the Secret Service, they never just slid the Sig Sauer across the table in my direction and said, the president's going to Slovenia, the president's headed to New York, why don't you head on over and see what you can do?
Yeah.
When I went through, it was a 5.5-month academy, and every assignment I had was detail-specific planning, and not just detail planning, but backup planning, contingency planning, very detailed. So my agenda for the campaign, but also become governor, is very specific and detail-oriented, because that's my background in the Secret Service. You, personally, your family, you just don't throw up a building without planning.
No.
And I think planning is instrumental to you, but also to your dad and his successes. Can you talk about planning, how important that is?
I think without question. I mean, again, things just don't happen by luck, right? You have to actually have that kind of vision and that forethought. But you know, especially when you're talking about something like construction, where you have so many dynamic things that all have to happen, and they have to happen on a critical path timeline, and you know, there's so much that goes into that. I mean, that's frankly the foundation for any business. And you know, I certainly see it with the guys, the way they plan for everything. So I know you're well versed in it, because I mean, if they're driving me crazy with the level of detail and planning, I think you got it covered. Because no, you can't do anything in this world realistically without that kind of planning. Without it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just get executed. You need that plan, you need that vision, and then you also need the execution. And so all of those things combined make for a very formidable thing, whether it's economic development, whether it's government. And you know, again, one of those things that's generally lacking, because so many things are just sort of fly by night, and we'll say something here and we'll try to backfill it later, and it doesn't work. So I imagine your experience is going to come very handy when you're governor.
Well, thank you very much. We talked about planning, talked about trade policy, talked about what your dad's doing with tax cuts. Let's go maybe more to the core conviction, the First and Second Amendment. You've spoken many times very eloquently on your passion and conviction. You know, you just take a step back and think, well, shouldn't everybody be passionate and have conviction about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? But you speak on that so eloquently, and I'd just like to give you the floor and I'll let you espouse on the First and Second Amendment and why that's so important.
Well, listen, I mean, obviously, the First speaks for itself, although there's obviously a flagrant attack on that in this country as well, meaning if you don't have sort of the collective liberal groupthink, you know, you can't say that. You can't even think that. I mean, we've seen so much of that. Actually, Candace Owens, who's in the room right now, her and Charlie Kirk sorry, Candace, I'm throwing you under the bus, but her and Charlie Kirk, and Charlie worked with me so much on the campaign, I mean, they recognized this very early, and you see what's happened even this week with Kanye and everything that's going on, which is, it's not even a political ideology. It's the notion that you can think for yourself and you don't just have to buy in and toe the line. And you know, I've seen that from the other side, where it's, I mean, you could be 99% in agreement with what they're saying, but that 1% is enough to basically have you ostracized, blackballed, and thrown out of the room. It's gotten rather crazy. For me, as a sportsman, as a hunter, as a competitive shooter, I've traveled all over the country shooting competitively at a pretty high level. You know, the Second Amendment is the obvious one to back up the First. And when people start trying to attack that basic right, well, what's the next one to go? Is that any less or more significant than the Fourth? I mean, it is the Second Amendment. It's the second thing our founding fathers thought of after freedom of speech and religion. It wasn't some sort of afterthought. You know, well, this isn't, right, you know, Amendment 2476. I mean, this is this second thing to protect those basic rights. And when I see the arguments, well, you know, well, that would never happen from a tyrannical government, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, you'll say that stuff about my father. You know, I've seen what's going on from the other side. You see what's going on with some of these investigations, and you know, the amazing thing of what perhaps I've had to go through over the last, you know, year is this notion of, you know, essentially trying to create these conspiracies and all that. All it's led to is discovery that it's actually the other side doing all these things. So, you know, while it's been a nuisance, it's been really expensive and a pain, it's actually been sort of amazing, because I can sit back and be like, well, that's nice. How are we going to fix this problem? Oh, it's not really a problem. I'm like, no, it is a problem. Look at what's going on. You know, so these basic rights and foundations, I mean, they're sacrosanct. There's the fact that we're even debating some of these things, the fact that you'd question someone's ability to say something. You may not have to agree with it, and I'm fine with that too. Defend the other side vehemently. But you know, the attacks have been so ridiculous that it does make you wonder where it's going. When I see people in the UK and some of these other, what you think of, democratic countries, they're getting thrown in jail because they said something that someone else believed is hate speech. I get it. I'm not for hate speech in any way, shape, or form. But I see some of the things that they're saying. I'm like, I don't know. It sounds like a joke to me. They're getting thrown in jail in the UK. Whether it's extreme or not is almost irrelevant. The fact that you can't say something just because you're worried about offending others, isn't it their right then to be able to fight back verbally, defend your position? It's fine. If it's that crazy, guess what? People will get it. You have to articulate it properly. You have to be out there in the game. But it is a real problem in this country, both as it relates to the first, and you see the onslaught on the second. It's, I look at it.
It's almost every day.
Oh, it's every day. And I mean, you see them, essentially weaponizing other, groups that you can't possibly attack back. So people can say whatever, but you can't possibly attack them because they're protected from, any sort of reproach, even if they're just regurgitating sound bites from someone in a room, in the marketing department of the DNC somewhere. That's a problem. But we're seeing it, and again, the good thing is, like all things left, they're overplaying their hand, and I think real, normal thinking Americans get it, they see it, and I'll probably take it for what it is.
Very well said. Very well said. We're not finished yet, but our time is drawing to a close because Don has a very busy schedule today. This is not probably even the last state he's going to visit today as he heads back. I'm going to ask what is probably an unfair question. So you're warned, okay?
Fine. So, at this point.
That's a good question.
Over the last 2 years, what did they ask me this?
Here's the question. It's unfair in this respect. It's hard to answer. So far, in your opinion, as a son and as a citizen, what has been your dad's greatest accomplishment?
Ooh. Man.
I told you.
Yeah, that's not an easy one. No, listen, I think what he's doing now, just even getting in this race. I mean, he's had a pretty amazing life. I mean, I've never seen him not win. No, I say
we haven't either.
No, but I say that not from a standpoint, but it's really sort of remarkable to see what he did. 30, 40 years ago, starting in real estate. His father was a builder, but he said, "Hey, I want to change the skyline of New York." I mean, he sort of created the first brand, in real estate. It was a vision. He was sort of ahead of the curve. Buildings today all incorporate all the things that he was doing 20 years ago, in terms of luxury real estate. And then he said, "You know what? Yeah, I think I could do a TV show. Let's see what happens." Does it again. Politics. Like, you saw he was upset with what was going on in this country for a long time. He threw a lot of stones from the sidelines, but eventually he's a man. And he said, "You know what? I can only do that for so long before I actually have to step up and step in the game." And even if it's, well, what the experts call it. I think when he first entered the race, I think, what was it, 0? Is there less than 0% chance of winning, they're all saying? But you know what? He had the guts to get in there and to get in the fight and to say, you know what, if I'm going to talk from the sidelines, like eventually you got to get in and play the game. And he did, and dominated that. So he's been good at virtually everything that he's done. But I think for me, as a patriotic American, as a father of 5 young kids, to see what he's doing to sort of transform what was, what I perceive to be, an incredible country going down a very bad slope very quickly. I think he's got a great chance, and what he'll do over the next, 6.5 years in office. He can really right so many of the wrongs that have happened and really, instill some of that common sense that's just been, bred out of politics over the last few decades. And, his pragmatism, his way of getting things done, his, certainly unorthodox approach, but effective, is amazing. So just for me, for the country I want to leave my kids, I can't think of anything more important than what's going on right now. And again, it's through a rather incredible life of doing unusual things and doing them well. To me, this is the biggest, and it's just, it was awesome to be, a small part of that win, and that's why we fought so hard, because we saw that. And it's awesome to be a fly on the wall now, watching him do it, from an outsider's perspective, because it's truly incredible.
It is incredible. It is incredible. You mentioned the campaign, and I thought about one story about our son Griffin, who you met earlier, and I didn't get permission to share this story, so I hope I don't get in trouble with him later today, but it was one of the presidential debates when we still had 16, 17 candidates up there on stage. Your dad was getting attacked, and by the way, I know how he feels.
Hey, we all do. Good thing is we like to fight.
Right.
It's easy.
But our son was in the kitchen, and they don't sit down and watch all the debates, okay? Not in our house anyway. The kids don't watch. So Griffin was on his way out of the kitchen. Your dad was speaking, responding to one of these attacks, and our son stopped and he said, "Hey, is that Donald Trump?" And then we just paused. Your dad responds, and then he said, "Man, that guy's so awesome."
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
We talked a lot about your dad. Time's coming to a close. You're a busy man. We've covered that. So when you are not helping Todd Lamb become the next governor of Oklahoma, when you are not in the office, what does Don Trump Jr. do to relax, wind? When you're not at a shooting event, when you're not in competition, what's relaxing for you, and what do you do?
Well, 5 young kids. So.
Well, no, I said, what's relaxing?
That's no longer relaxing. Yeah. By the way, I know how that happens now. So, yeah, I got a cable TV and a new hobby. Well, honestly, because I am on the road so much, so much of it is time with the kids. But sort of a combination of that and some of my outdoor pursuits, whether it's hunting, fishing, shooting, it's the antithesis of what I'm doing necessarily on a day-to-day basis. Although maybe politics is a little bit more hunting-like than most people would want to admit. So no, it's something like that. I mean, I think if people sort of see or follow me on like Instagram, they sort of see maybe a glimpse into my sort of non-work, non-politics life, and that's me with with my kids or me in the outdoors doing that sort of stuff. And I think it creates a good balance. It's one of the reasons, again, going back to 2A, or hunting. I push for those things. I advocate for those things, despite the fact that that's going to be very controversial with a lot of people, because I know what it did for me. I know what range time did for me as a kid. I know what time in the woods or on a stream, whatever it may have been, did for me as a kid, as opposed to sitting, in New York City. Not to say I was an angel, by any means, but all of those things and those experiences, instead of being on a couch or playing a video game, really made a difference in my life. Really made sure that I saw the other side of the world, and I think that really created some, a good way of looking at it. So if I can do that for my kids, and other kids, and impart some of that knowledge, that experience, the discipline, all of those things that come with the shooting sports, with the outdoor sports, with being, outdoors, all of that's me. So basically, if I'm not in a suit, I'm in a pair of Carhartts and a T-shirt doing something like that, with them. Some of the stuff's a little extreme. I got to leave them at home because the 3-year-old's not going to do so well in the Yukon, but she's getting there, and she's riding ATVs already, and then I get to some people that's awesome, and then I get the sort of helicopter parents like, oh my God, how could you possibly do that? That's terrible. So can't win them all. You can't win them all. But yeah, like I said, I think I fit better in Oklahoma than I probably do in New York City.
Well, you're welcome here anytime, by the way.
Appreciate
Am I right? He's welcome here anytime.
Thank you.
It's great to see you again. You know what? We started our relationship years ago when you came in for the Lieutenant Governor's turkey hunt, and thrilled that you came in a few times with that event. You're always welcome back. But it's not lost on me or all the supporters we have in the room. You didn't have to come to Oklahoma today. You didn't have to attend this event today. You didn't have to put your name on the invitation. So I want you to know personally, I'm very appreciative of our friendship. I'm appreciative that you're here. And I want you to know, citizen to citizen, friend to friend, and somebody's working hard to be the next governor of Oklahoma, I look forward to working with your dad and his administration to make America great again and make sure Oklahoma is an absolute integral part of making America great again.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Donald Trump Jr. I appreciate all your help. And I'll tell him to sleep figure while you walk out.
Really appreciate it. Be well.